Thank you very much. My name is Simon Long from The Economist. Chaibong yesterday spoke about first time and repeat offenders at this event. I'm a Asan Plenum recidivist. I come every year because I find it one of the most stimulating events I go to around Asia. This year we've been given a very simple assignment, which is between coffee and lunch to reorder East Asia. Just how simple that will be has been shown, I think, by the discussions we've had so far at this conference, where we see, has to be said, some slightly nuanced differences between the sort of order East Asia has and the sort of order to which it should move. On the one hand, we've had talk about the importance of the network of US bilateral alliances, the security framework which has allowed 40 years of remarkable growth across the region, and in particular, of course, in China. But we've also heard, particularly from representatives of China, that the order perhaps needs adjusting to reflect the enormous economic and other changes in the region. To guide us through this vision, we've got 5 very distinguished speakers, starting with, on my immediate left, Eric John, the president of Boeing Korea, who has taken up that post after more than 3 decades in the Foreign Service, including 3 stints in the embassy here, I believe. Beyond him is Professor Kikuchi Tsutomo, a professor of international relations at Aoyama Gakuin University and a senior fellow at the Japan Institute of International Affairs, a specialist in the political economy of Asia Pacific. Beyond him, Charles Morrison, who has been president of the East-West Center in Honolulu, almost as long as I've been at The Economist, and associated with it even longer, since 1980, I think. And then an old friend, Ren Xiao, professor of international politics at Fudan University in Shanghai, and director of the Center for the Study of Chinese Foreign Policy. And beyond him, Professor Yul Sun, professor of international and Japanese political economy, and the dean of the graduate school at Yonsei University. Because we have 5 speakers, I've asked all of them to restrain themselves as much as possible and try to keep their opening remarks to 5 minutes or so, and I will be keeping an eye on my watch. So please, we could start in the order of the seats. Eric.
Yeah, sure, thanks. Real honor to be here, I appreciate it, especially since I'm the only private sector guy here. But I found that the description of this seminar, for one thing, was a heavy focus on military, and I think coming from now the private sector, but the diplomatic sector before that, for me the U.S. rebalance toward Asia and how U.S. looks at Asia really has been, I'd say, that sort of military, not first policy, almost a military last policy. I think the military grabs a lot of attention and it's easy to quantify with numbers. But if you look at economic engagement, at diplomatic engagement, that's where the real shift has been, I think, over the last 5 years or so of this rebalance effort. On the economic side, the TPP is huge for the United States. It's significant for the region. It's really, in one sense, a paradigm shift from this network of bilateral trade agreements to one that is much more comprehensive and is not closed in the sense that once it's finished, it's those members. It's one that sets up a platform for additional membership. So it's a very significant shift. As well as the other engagement that the United States has here with APEC, with the ASEAN Economic Commission, the China-U.S. bilateral investment treaty that's going on right now, as well as our network of bilateral trade agreements such as the Korea-U.S. FTA. Diplomatically, I would probably you could put alliance structures under military or diplomatic. I would tend to see it more diplomatic in how we manage those. The U.S.-Japan alliance, as witnessed by Prime Minister Abe's visit this week, is vibrant, and it's one that's growing, shifting, and accommodating the needs of the region. The Korea bilateral alliance, likewise, is one that constantly can accommodate change here. Similarly, Australia. And Philippines is one with the Partnership for Growth that demonstrates a renewed strength in Philippines and one of growing importance for the region. Thailand, I mean, I was ambassador there. I think all of us are chagrined at the coup, but I would say that alliance is one that remains on perhaps a pause while Thailand itself deals with government issues. Beyond that, within the alliance structure, you have the trilaterals, the bilaterals, defense state engagements. It's one it's a network that permits constant shifting of engagement as necessary. And then you look at the bilateral partnerships throughout the region. The U.S.-Malaysia relationship has risen to a level we couldn't have envisioned 5 years ago. U.S.-Vietnam comprehensive partnership that looks not only at trade but military cooperation, human rights discussions. The Indonesia strategic relationship that's built on a foundation of a very vibrant democracy. And then China, the breadth and depth of our engagement with China, I think, is often forgotten as headlines seem to put U.S. and China in a confrontational mood and ignore the vast arrays of cooperation that we have on military, economic, political dialogues. Regional diplomacy with the U.S. participation in East Asia Summit, again, something most people wouldn't have envisioned just 6-7 years ago, and has been another paradigm shift for how the U.S. engages the region, plus ASEAN, the Lower Mekong Initiative, the ASEAN Regional Forum, and six-party talks, which has, albeit for one party, has certainly enhanced the engagement of the other 5 parties. Finally, after that, that's where I would put the military relationship, and to me, it's largely an expansion of the status quo. You haven't seen major shifts in how U.S. deploys forces here or positions troops here, but it's one of just continuing to play to the strengths that we have in the region already. So,
Thank you very much, and thank you for being such a model timekeeper. Professor Kikuchi.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm quite pleased to be here. And I would mention 3 points. First one is changing nature of international relations in these regions. Secondly, how the United States have been responding to it. The third one, challenges and tasks are facing the United States. So first one is changing nature of Asian international relations. I would say not power shift, but paradigm shift in Asia. I would invite your attention to looking beyond U.S.-China relations. So according to conventional views, regional orders is decided by major powers. So actually we have been discussing a variety of scenarios of the future U.S.-China relation and its implications for regional orders. So already yesterday we discussed continuation of the U.S. Regional hegemony, China's regional dominance, U.S.-China condominium, so-called G2, and also U.S.-China Cold War types of confrontation. But in my understanding, neither will happen in the foreseeable future. The U.S. no longer a fully fledged regional hegemon. China not fully fledged rising powers. So both U.S., China, a lot of vulnerabilities, constraints, internally and externally. And so So probably U.S.-China relations are in the coming years have a full of conflict and competition, but those conflict and competition will be contained within a manageable range. In such overall pictures, so-called the rest of Asia comes in. So both United States and China need support of the rest of Asia to promote their own policy agenda. And if you look at the Asia, we have several countries having substantial economic, political, and military powers. They have substantial bargaining powers in great games. Even ASEAN, a group of small countries, could play a critical role in this great game. So in my understanding, the policies of those rest of Asia will have a grave impact on the future of Asia. But the problem is that the future policy directions of those, most of the Asian countries are still uncertain, not yet fixed. So ultimate goal of the United States is to promote, sustain rule-based liberal orders. So Asian countries have been adjusting themselves to rule-based liberal orders, but still future are uncertain. How U.S. respond? A previous speaker already mentioned United States had a lot to adjust the new realities. So economic relations, bilateral FTA or promoting TPP, security enhanced alliance, the new trilateral security cooperation like U.S., Japan, India, and strengthening new partnership and so forth. And as for the institutional dimensions, U.S. enhanced its commitment to ASEAN-related regional institutions. And now, most of the Asian countries are willing to enhance the security and economic relation with the United States. But thirdly, U.S. has many challenges and tasks. First one is so-called expectation gaps. First one, resource and attention. So United States is a global power. So U.S. has so many other commitments, not just Asia. Second, time range. So U.S., some measures taken by the United States takes time to unfold. But the increased demand by allies and partners for immediate or instant benefit to gratification. And also U.S. response to existing territorial and maritime disputes are not effective enough to respond to the actions to change our status quo by force. And on strategic patience, some countries are concerned that this strategic patience applies not only North Korea, but also to Asia as a whole. And immediate, but the United States have done a lot, as I mentioned. And probably our most important immediate challenges and tasks is the earliest conclusion of TPP. And earliest conclusion of TPP will radically change the perception of Asian countries to the United States. Also, designing the post-TPP strategy is quite important to expand TPP to include other Asian economies toward so-called free trade agreement of the Asia Pacific. And also, we hope U.S. take concrete action against the change of status quo by forcing maritime domains in Asia. I would stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Simon. And let me just say, for anyone who comes in the room, there seem to be a couple of seats in the front row here and one a little farther back. So there is a seat for everyone. What I think I want to do is talk briefly about the vision, since we're talking about order, and then to talk a little bit about where we are and what the problems are, and then finally to end up with the question of the U.S. role. And I haven't heard anything that I disagree with so far. As far as the vision, to me, the real vision is a vision of a security community. It's not a G1 or G2 or a primacy or anything like that, but it's whether in the next few decades we can have a region where people growing up in this region cannot even imagine their countries at war. And that's really what's happened in a part of Western Europe, and it's happened in my own lifetime, that an area of the world which was a cockpit of conflict, that now young French, young British, young Spanish, young Germans can grow up, and there's no defense planning of their countries against each other, and there's no thought by young people that their countries would ever be in conflict. And that is an enormous achievement for international relations, and that, I think, is what we would like for this region, but we're a long way from there. Still, we have many building blocks, and one of those building blocks is a fairly stable state system. This is very different from the Middle East in that respect, and any international order has to depend on a state system, however much you might believe that the future is going to be based on networks. And secondly, you have a lot of things that Eric has already talked about: economic integration. You have what has now become a fairly robust set of regional institutions which may not have a lot of accomplishments but helps socialize leaders. And as far as I can see, you have no really imperial power. Now, some people might object to that, but I don't see that. I think most of the disputes are really at the edges, and we're not fearing that one country is going to swallow up another. The problems are the problems that we've talked about associated with power transitions, the mirror imaging problem. We still have questions about the values and norms of a system, whether it's a traditional Westphalian system, whether it's a system that embodies a responsibility to protect. And we have a lot of history issues, and there are three categories of those history issues. For Americans, probably the most frustrating category is that this region hasn't been able to put in 70 years to put the history of World War II behind it. We also have a lot of territorial disputes that are based on absurd interpretations of documents and of decades past. And we have Korea as North Korean issue as a remaining kind of historical problem. Now, what about the U.S. role? I thought Philip Stevens stated it very well yesterday when he said that the U.S. is indispensable but not sufficient. And so we've talked how, and Mr. Kissinger talked about how relative U.S. power relative to the rest of the world has declined. What we haven't quite said is that there's no other power on the horizon that will be as powerful vis-a-vis the rest as the United States was, not just in 1950, but in 1980, or even today. We do face a world in which we will have many actors, some, China and the United States, much larger than others, but it's a world that will put premium on international cooperation. So that is key, and the U.S. is going to be an indispensable part of that, because even though it may have only 20% of world GDP by mid-century, it still has enormous dynamism in its society because of immigration, 50 million Americans today were born overseas, less than a million Chinese, and 1.4 billion people were born overseas. So that's an enormous contribution to society dynamics. We have a system, particularly the relationship between government, industry, and academia, that generates all kinds of ideas. We have a political system called separation of powers that also generates a lot of policy ideas and an ability for redemption. We have very well established institutions, including higher education, our scientific establishment, our corporations, and I think we will be providing public goods for many years to come. The trick, and this is where I end, is whether we are able to work with the forces of change in the region in a way that is constructive to building order in this region. And this region, because it will be the key part of the global community, whether we have order and whether we can perform together international responsibilities and provide public goods, is a key issue for our future.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Professor Ren.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. 5 years ago, during the G20 summit here in Seoul in 2010, it was agreed upon that we need to reform the IMF arrangements for voting power, and it was agreed to increase the voting power and voice of the emerging countries, to increase their voice in global governance, and so on. Unfortunately, this has been blocked at the U.S. Congress, despite the repeated calls by the IMF and its managing director, Ms. Lagarde, and despite that the U.S. will still keep the veto power, even when the reform is complete. So 5 years later, it has still not happened. This is a reflection of the U.S. as a vested interest, and it is not constructive. More recently, China took the initiative to create an Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, in a way to meet the demand of the developing countries in the region for capital and for development. According to an estimate between the 10 years from 2010 to 2020, as much as $8 trillion US dollars are needed for the development of infrastructure in the region. But World Bank and Asian Development Bank, or ADB, can only meet a small part of the huge demand for infrastructure. And after 30 years of growth, China is widely believed to have become the second largest economy in the world. What does that mean? Different people have different understandings. But China has grown to some extent, and it now has some capabilities to help other developing countries in terms of development. Just to create AIIB is a legitimate move for achieving common development in the region. It has been indicated by the fact that as many as 57 countries have become the inaugural member states of AIIB, including most of the G7 member states except for US and Japan, including most of the G20 member states, and including all BRICS nations, indicating that the initiative is widely endorsed and welcomed in the international community. And I think the Obama administration was wrong, seeing the AIIB as a threat to the U.S. and asked some of its allies in the region not to join. Fundamentally, one cannot resist the working of geoeconomics and the market forces, which are driving a number of processes in Asia today. China and ASEAN formed an FTA over a decade ago. China and South Korea has reached an agreement for a bilateral FTA. Hopefully will push forward for the trilateral FTA among China, Japan, and South Korea negotiations. Even North Korea cannot resist the market forces for long, which can be seen from the fact that there has been a surge of cell phone users in the country, North Korea. I remember that several years ago before I entered the country of North Korea, I had to leave my cell phone before I entered their country. And now perhaps the situation is different. The existing institutions need to be reformed, including the Bretton Woods institutions, of course. The G20 needs to be reinforced, and ADB needs to be reformed as well. Since its inception in 1967, I think the reform at ADB is long overdue. And with the creation of AIIB, there is some pressure for reform at the Asian Development Bank. The United States would play a more constructive role in the region by recognizing this and by working more with China in terms of development, instead of seeing China's proposals and an offset to American power. And given the most recent developments, it seems to me that there is much room for the countries to work together in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, Professor Sun.
Thank you.
And you have your full 5 to 7 minutes, despite your...
Yes, it is an honor and a pleasure to be able to speak on this great panel. I would like to address Japan factor in the regional system, or more closely, Abe effect. Ministers Abe's came to power and how his policies have changed or contributed to the change of the regional international system. East Asian order, we have multi-layered East Asian order. On one level, economic, we have increasing economic interdependence and cross-border trade and investment. And then at the level, we see a lot of cultural exchanges and actually cultural hybridizations that spread over the region. But at the same time, those cultural exchanges have been influenced, these days by the nationalism. And third, there's a security rivalries in the region, mostly between United States and China. But since 2012, Japan is, I should say, kind of re-emerging in the scene as an important regional player. Not in the sense that Japan is regaining regional influence by a measure of economic, dynamism, but Mr. Abe's political agendas and his foreign policy, particularly security policies, that are sort of shaking the regional order in ways that are increasingly securitized the East Asian relations in many ways. And in that sense, it's sort of dividing the Northeast Asian region and creating some structural holes, I should say, in academic terms. Let me talk about the three developments. One is security. Abe government has focused its regional policy agendas on the deteriorating security environment. It has strengthened its bilateral alliance with the United States because of that, and try to reinterpret the long-standing policy to what is allow for collective self-defense. And he's also taken hardline approach to China. And for years, China-Japan relations have been deteriorated. And Mr. Abe has been keen to stress the emergence of strong Japan in its dispute with China in several areas, and pushing forward security divide between U.S., Japan on the one side and China on the other. So that's kind of overshadowing the new type of major country relationship between United States and China that includes not just security but also diplomatic and economic relationships. And together, there's a rightist rhetoric of the Abe government, or Prime Minister Abe and his staff in the cabinet has contributed to this the situation. So I'm not saying that Abe government's policy has deteriorated or securitized the relationship, but in a sense contribute to the trends. And I should mention the current Japanese government's historical revisionism. That has been the primary source of conflict. I mean, diplomatic friction between Japan and Korea, and we see that that friction not just occurred on the top, government to government level, but the people to people level. This is really worrisome situation development in the bilateral relationships. And then finally, I should draw attention to the TPP negotiations at the moment. It is a good thing, and the TPP is a game changer in the regional or Asia-Pacific FTA race. But other governments decide to enter the negotiations, and that has sort of generated securitizing effects on the economic deals, in a sense that China was not so serious or worried about TPP before 2012, but after Japan entered the scene, then you try to provide alternatives, diluting the TPP attempts and all other things. So you see the strategic competition even in the field of trade relations and the trade negotiations. So I'm a little bit provocative on this point that now that Japan's security policy, economic policies, and economic or the ideological stances have helped to increase sort of the divide in the region by securitizing many issues that should not be over-securitized. So in that sense, what can you do? There must be a role for the United States and a role from the middle powers, like Korea. In order to establish new or reorder East Asia, many people say that South Korea should be able to play a middle power role, because it is positioned at the crossroad of communication between China and Japan, U.S., China, U.S. clusters and China clusters in trade issues. That's good, but at the moment, the first step for the country, Korea, is you need to improve relations with Japan. Otherwise, bridging role will not really work. For example, Japan sometimes blames South Korea that is leaning toward China by forming anti-Japanese history alliance. That's a Japanese term. While China used history cards to allure to pull South Korea into their side, and then drive a wedge between U.S., Japan on the one, and Korea on the other. So, given the aggravated bilateral relations with Japan, Korea is kind of sandwiched between the two poles. So you need to improve the relations. But the Abe's Japan, as you see, the Abe, Prime Minister Abe's comment, during his trip to the United States, he reaffirms the Kono statement in Murayama's statement, but it sounds reluctantly, reiterating all those things. So that's a source of worries and source of contention between the two. Then the Abe government will stay, most likely stay in power until 2018 if I'm too optimistic. Then, his historical revisionism will not be dramatically changed. Then Japan is all the same, will be all, mostly the same as now. Then how South Korea should do in dealing with, improving the relationship with Japan under the current government, whose political leverage is increasingly declining. So I'm kind of, pessimistic or not overly optimistic of the Korea's role as a middle power, particularly in the region, in terms of reshaping or reordering the regional system. Then you need America's role. But at the same time, the history issues are involved, and the United States is not in good position to advise in this issue. At least warning that historical revisionism is a ruling hand for Mr. Abe to play when Japan wants to increase its regional influence. Yes, you need a balanced approach toward Japan and Korea to improve those relations. But I think the last days, yesterday's talk over the American influence or American capabilities in the region, particularly in this issue, I'm not so sure that United States will play a constructive role in improving the bilateral relations. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for keeping to time and for making such interesting and thoughtful remarks. However, if I were to grade you against our goal of reordering East Asia, I'm not sure we got that far. So Professor Ren Xiao came up with a few concrete suggestions: reform of Bretton Woods institutions, the ADB, the US having a more open attitude to the AIIB. But overall, perhaps I could ask you to focus on what other, if any, institutional changes, multilateral or the region needs. Perhaps would you like to take that on?
I think the economic structures are evolving as we've seen. Security structure and somehow multilateral security structure, and somehow I think to get to Charles's point about getting to a region where war is seen as just not a recourse by any nation here is somehow going to have to be linked to a security construct not unlike what you have in Europe to get to that type of situation. There are attempts at it here and there, but it hasn't been. It's lagged, I guess I would say, behind economic structural.
Were the six-party talks as close as it got?
I would hope we could do better than that. It perhaps got there. Certainly the North Korea issue is at the very core of security concerns in the region.
Professor Kikuchi, would you accept Professor Sohn's argument that the Abe government's policy has succeeded in, I think his phrase was, securitizing non-security issues, I guess making economic and other issues matters that become a security concern? And if so, how could that be handled?
No, frankly speaking, in my understanding, other countries securitize, the the relations in Asia. And I don't know whether Prime Minister Abe is a historical revisionist or not. But he, as a Prime Minister of Japan, head of the government, he officially mentioned he respects the Murayama's statement and also Kono's statement. That is a official commitment by the Prime Minister. That commitment constrained Mr. Abe's behavior or action in the coming years. So that is so I'm not sure it is productive to discuss about whether Mr. Abe is a real, true historical revisionist or not. We just judge it official commitment and also his own behavior in the coming years. And as for the TPP, of course, every economic agreement carries some security implications. And Asia already nearly 100 bilateral or regional FTA have been concluded. And many those FTA have some security implications. In case of TPP, of course, TPP has some security implication, but in the purpose of the TPP is to deepen regional economic connectivities, and Asia have been deepened our own economic relations, and the regional production network have been established in Asia. But even so, still we need, deeper, cooperation, deeper integration, which means more harmonization of domestic economic institutions. So if you look at the case of the TPP negotiation, TPPs are, we have 21 committees. So most of the the committees are relating to harmonization of domestic institutions, like government procurement, intellectual property rights, or state-owned enterprise, and so forth. So we need a little bit more, harmonization of domestic economic institutions to further, facilitate regional economic integrations. And from Japanese perspective, Japan-based multinationals, we have been establishing region-wide production network in Southeast Asia, connecting, Japan and Southeast Asian countries since 1980s. And 1990s, Japan-based multinationals have been region-wide production network with China. So, it's a big benefit for Japan-based multinational corporation to establish region-wide, deeper economic integration scheme. So we engage in not just TPP negotiation, but also regional comprehensive economic partnership agreement. But in our understanding, still RCEP negotiation, agenda of RCEP are not enough to realize the deeper regional economic integration. So right now, the first priority is TPP, then expand TPP to include other countries. So TPP is now 12 countries, but TPP is not just the agreement among 12 economies. That is, should be expanded to include other economies. So as I mentioned, the next pressing task for the United States also, for Japan is design post-TPP strategies. How we expand TPP to include other Asia. Thank you.
Charles, there seems to be a consensus on the panel that TPP is, I think it was, Eric called it a paradigm shift, that it is central now to both the future of the region and America's role in it. How much does it matter to the sorts of ambitions you were talking about of getting towards a European-style harmony in the region. The TPP is being sold to Congress and the American people explicitly as a way of countering China, as a way of making sure America, not China, writes the rules, to quote the president.
Well, it's not TPP per se. I think it's more liberalized trade arrangements in general, which facilitate the flow not just of goods, but also of capital. And so I would say that I think TPP is tremendously important. It's actually not very significant economically. A little bit in the U.S.-Japan case, but many of the economies involved already have free trade with each
So
other.
I think RCEP is bigger in tariff.
But it's a significant agreement in terms of the standards. And so if it's successful, I think it will set a benchmark that other economies, including China, I think will want to join. And then I think that on the investment banks, the important thing is the cooperation between the banks, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and the new investment bank. And here I think there is some misunderstanding. You know, the United States is an established power and already is connected with the World Bank. So initially when the Asian Development Bank was proposed by the Japanese, we were reluctant. And when this bank was proposed by the Chinese, we were again reluctant for the same reason, that we thought it would undercut the standards that were already there. But I think there was, despite the way it was done, I think the American opposition was useful in it actually forced the Chinese to refine their ideas, to explain them to the people who eventually came in, and to say that they would not have a veto in this bank. And so I think it is now a very welcome, hopefully responsible member of the financial system. And the test will be the cooperation between this bank and the other existing banks. So that's
Although
important.
wouldn't the lesson they've drawn from the ADB and the World Bank be that you don't actually need a formal veto? That if you own enough of the shares, you have an effective one.
Yeah. And then there are two other ideas that I think are concrete ideas. One, General Yao mentioned yesterday, which is, she mentioned it just in the U.S.-China context, but I think on a larger context, really how this region positions itself vis-a-vis global issues and what we do to provide global public services. So we need to consult among each other, ourselves, and they won't be totally coordinated, but at least get an understanding of these issues and how we can be helpful in terms of the maintenance and advancement of global systems. And the final thing, and I've been trying to do this in my own institution, working with some Korean institutions, and this institution is doing exactly the same thing, which is in this meeting. It's really to promote a cooperation among North Pacific countries, meaning China, Korea, Japan, United States, hopefully Canada. Russia's a little problem now, but it should be in. But, you know, you get all the Southeast Asians in, and first you have many, many voices. And secondly, you inevitably end up with some competition by the larger economies over the smaller economies. If you do have a lot of bilaterals, like the U.S. has with China, strategic and economic dialogue, or with Japan, then you can't connect these three most important economies in the world. And the Koreans and the Canadians, as middle-sized powers, have important voices to play here too. So I think whether it's, I'm not promoting a new regional organization, we have enough of those on the intergovernmental stage. But I think these kinds of dialogues that facilitate interaction among these important players in the North Pacific is very important.
Professor Kikuchi, I think you wanted to chip in.
As for the AIIB, I hope AIIB will play a quite constructive role in developing our infrastructure in Asia. But that, of course, many Asian countries are facing the shortage of infrastructure. But current problem is not those shortage of infrastructure is not due to the shortage of fund. Fund is there, here, huge fund. So because of mostly because of failure of designing or developing economically feasible project. Because now it's a huge money is in the private sectors. So look at case of just a few months ago, Japanese government devised so-called ODA charters, and now renamed Charter, not ODA, Charter for Economic Cooperation. So because, now, public fund is quite important, but, how to cooperate with private sector is critical for economic, cooperation. So because of that, now it's, from ODA to, economic cooperations. So in Asian context, we have a huge private fund. So how to utilize, how to encourage private sector to be engaged in infrastructure building, more critical, rather than just, prepare for the public fund. That's my feeling. And also, economic development is quite, infrastructure building is quite, important, but we need a little bit more comprehensive approach to economic development. Not just, infrastructure building, but also other, human resource development and community building, a lot of things. Actually, World Bank and Asian Development Bank, they are engaged in quite comprehensive in that way. That is my thank you.
Thank you. Professor Reordering, in your remarks, you mentioned that it would be better if the US were to join AIIB. But at the moment, it strikes me that there are now a lot of institutions growing up and expanding in a whole variety of spheres. KICA, the Shanghai Cooperation Forum, in Finance and New Development Bank, the AIIB, the Silk Road Fund, in trade, I suppose, RCEP, in which China has quite a big role and the US has none at the moment. I mean, is a kind of parallel regional order being set up almost inadvertently?
I think all these joined together are reshaping the Asian region. I think Asia is known as well known for its lack of institutions in the past, and now all the institutions are flourishing over the past years, and the growth of institution to me is helpful for the building of trust and common development among the countries. Because when countries are working together within the institutions, they realize that they all can benefit from the institutions. And by benefiting from these institutions, by working together within these institutions, they realize the usefulness of these institutions, and they may want to promote these institutions in the future. So, I see it as a very important trend in the Asian region of the years. On security, it is more difficult for countries to build trust, for example. And the hub and spoke system with the United States at the center is firm, and U.S. is attaching much importance to this. But still, I see some positive developments. For example, between the United States and China, they try to build some kind of trust or better understanding at the highest level. For example, between the top leaders. So in that sense, I think Sunnyland summit was good, and the latest summit in Beijing was helpful as well. Also, between U.S. and China, they have created various institutions between the two great powers, be it strategic and economic dialogue, Asian affairs, Asia Pacific security consultation mechanism, military to military, and so on and so forth. So I see it as a positive given check.
Thank you very much. Asan, if I could come back to you, you alluded to the difficulty of middle powers generally and South Korea in particular in sort of navigating a course between these big powers. So the Korea Times this morning described it as like a tightrope walk between, on the one hand, a US-Japan military alliance, and on the other, South Korea's economic partnership with China. Looking forward, how worried are you about that? I mean, so far it seems that South Korea can walk that tightrope very effectively, but is there something which might cause it to unbalance, or to have to jump to one side or the other?
That's a very difficult question.
That's why I asked it.
Yeah. I think that it depends on the issue areas because, I mean, like I said, you look at the East Asian system, you have, varied levels, multi-layered. So the South Korean response or South Korean policy, between the two poles, I mean, you have, different. So, for example, the security, yes, it's really hard. I mean, it's a hard balancing area. So South Korea is obviously with the United States and in alliance, no question about that. But other areas, for example, economic areas, trade areas. Yes, you are part of. I mean, South Korea want to, enter the TPP. I mean, U.S. initiated TPP negotiations, or maybe negotiations closed and South Korea enter the treaty. But then South Korea can side with that TPP because there is a lack so far the lack of alternative. But after that you have region-wide, I mean Asia only trade networks like Professor Kikuchi just mentioned. Investment areas, yes, you are part of the ADB and you are the member of ADB and you're a member of the new AIIB, and I don't think South Korea should choose the side because the state of investment regime is a layering rather than one versus the other, right? So AIIB is not attempt to replace the ADB or part of the influence of the World Bank. So at the moment, two can coexist, so South Korea should play in that way. So the middle powers diplomacy can be multi-layered and complex approaches to the individual areas. But the one worry is if many of the relations are overly securitized by the security competition between the great powers. That's the worst case scenario, and if South Korea and other middle powers, work together to prevent that from happening in the region.
Thank you very much. I should throw it open to questions from the floor now. Start with Leif over there.
Thank you very much. Leif Easley at the Asan Institute and Ewha Women's University. For each panelist, may I ask, what is the most positive and most negative norm you see emerging for the regional order? From Professor Run's remarks, we heard about Chinese institution building, and from Professor Sun, we heard about Japanese securitization in the region. But it's not clear to me exactly which norms are being advanced or indeed internalized by those important processes. And Ambassador John and Professor Kikuchi and Professor Morrison talked about high standards for trade and rule-based interaction in security community. And if I may suggest three norms worth advancing on those three dimensions, they would be to resist carve-outs, don't cancel trilateral meetings, and don't boycott or wait out regional leaders. Thank you very much.
Well, who would like to have a go first of all?
Well, thank you, Leif, for your question. What is going on right now at AIIB is the 57 countries are together discussing its charter. Two more meetings will be held, one in Beijing, one in Singapore, to discuss the charter. And by the end of June, the charter will be finalized. So we will see very soon what the contents of the charter. What we know now is probably China is not going to seek any veto power within the IIB. The first president of the IIB will likely be Mr. Jing Liqun, a Chinese. However, the later presidents may be nationals from foreign countries. So it will not be the truth that unlike ADB, in which a Japanese national is always the president, at AIB, it will not be the situation that the Chinese always be the president, and so on, as a governance structure issues and so on. So it is interesting to watch what will happen at AIIB as a new institution.
Professor Kikuchi, then Charles.
I'll share briefly on the AIIB in a little bit broader context. If we look back the last 25 or 30 years in Asia, we have seen emergence of a variety of overlapping institutions dealing with same issue like trade, economic cooperation, or military confidence building, political dialogue, and so forth, with different membership. So now, from APEC to recent ADMM Plus and AIIB. So usually in international relations, politics, those overlapping institutions. In case of overlapping institutions, some competition between similar institutions taking place. And effective institutions survive, not effective institutions disappear. But Asia, such kind of competitions never happened. So why so many overlapping institutions? Probably basic, the fundamental reason is uncertain futures. Because of the uncertainty of regional politics and economics, almost every country wants to keep as many institutional choice, institutional venues. So probably, the AIIB may be one of such, examples. So additional, layer. But, probably the only exception is a TPP. TPP is a quite strong institutions. And in case of Asia, why we allow a variety of institutions? Our membership is quite little. We don't need so strong commitment. No human resources or financial resources. Just attending a dialogue and something like that. And the FTAs are quite shallow, and so participation cost is quite small. But TPPs are probably the only exception in Asia. Because TPP demand huge domestic adjustment. So probably once TPP is concluded, that will provide the basic our modality, or how to say, a template for Asia-Pacific economic and trade relations. So I mentioned, early conclusion is quite important in Asia.
Thank you. Charles.
Well, I liked your 3 norms, and I was just going to add maybe a couple more. One is I think you don't embarrass other leaders in public. You do accept apologies, and you don't force choices like the choice between China and the United States. Nobody wants that. But behind all that is a question of leadership, and a leadership in terms of whether you cater to the most domestic, most uninformed domestic opinions in your society, or whether you can move beyond that and act responsibly internationally. And I think that's a real question for the region and for the world.
Well, that's 6 good norms so far. So I think the first one, resisting carve-outs, ain't going to happen. Ambassador John, Professor Stone, do you want to add some norms, or should we go on to the next question? Please, there was Scott and Doug, and maybe we can take 2 or 3 questions at once because we're only 10 minutes left now. Scott Snyder.
Hi. I agree with Charles that the region really does look to Europe in some ways as it thinks about how to order itself. But the upshot from the panel that I take away is the challenge of balancing collective security versus cooperative security institutions, and the impact, potential mitigating impact of regional trade that I think is probably less salient in the European institution formation experience. And so I'd just like responses from the panel on that.
Thank you. Doug Powell.
Thank you. I wanted to reiterate Simon's earlier question, which is, what about SICA and SCO, the security side of this? We've been reverting back to the economic, which has always been the case in Asia. We want to talk about economics and not about security. Were it not for an alert and courageous Korean delegate to the SICA meeting, that meeting may have produced a very exclusionary document in the last go-round. President Xi Jinping at that speech talked about Asians providing Asian security, and there was kind of a strong message there. Where is this going in the views of the panel?
Thank you. One more question, and we'll come back.
If we're going to reorder East Asia, isn't this really more like, shouldn't we be doing some culling of organizations in East Asia? Because quite frankly, TPP, is that God's answer to everything? Well, I sort of remember a time when the APEC, which has not been mentioned, incidentally, also had a vision in which everything was supposed to be solved by 2010 and 2020 for its membership. So it seems to me that in East Asia, we have and you're right, talk is cheap and the admission is, but what we have is actually a huge proliferation of organizations, and should we not, in fact, cull some of them?
I'm with you, Ed. If we were starting, I'd start the cull with APEC as a reporter. But can we perhaps start with Professor Son to pick up whatever you'd like to answer out of these three questions?
The institutions with regard to strategic rivalries in the region, great powers, middle powers. I think we can distinguish 2 types. One is that you want to delegitimate the existing order, existing institutions. 2 is just layering, because there's a deficit, so we want to fill the gap. I think the AIIB at the moment is filling the gap. You're not, asking for new ideas of development that kind of, replace the supremacy of so-called Washington consensus or whatever. I mean, neoliberal globalization. So that is it, and then also we see that a lot of trade competitions, multilateral negotiation, multilateral trade or mega FTA competitions between the powers, and because it is trade, unless it's overly securitized, basically it complement with each other. In the end, you evolve toward the one single whole, AFTAC or whatever you can imagine. But the CICA is different. The CICA is try to delegitimate the existing alliance order and try to replace it by a new multilateral security system. So, at the moment we see two developments in the region, and our discussion should be focused on not just the East Asian institutions as a whole, but that we can see these two-level development, and I would see that you don't see serious delegitimation efforts by China at the moment, but the theoretically, the rising power always not immediately counterbalance the existing established order, established power, but you went through the delegitimation and decomposition, composition phase, and then outright counterbalancing. So we are somewhere in between the existing order and delegitimation.
Is that right, Professor Wen, that America and those with an interest in the current order should be worried about KICA?
But I still
no,
don't
that was
think.
Professor Wen.
You better answer.
All right. Well, if President Xi's speech at CICA last year in Shanghai sounded exclusive to the United States, I think his speech writers had to be blamed. But what happened later was, well, the pendulum swings, and the pendulum actually swung back later. For example, when the U.S.-China Strategic Economic Dialogue was held last year, Premier Wang Yang, Vice Premier Wang Yang of China, said something in Chicago that something like that. The U.S. is still the leader of international economics and something like that. And he ignited, his words ignited some criticisms later. So I think the place is the right place is somewhere between the two. This is one comment. The other is that, well, let us be aware of the context of CICA, which was a gathering of all Asian countries. All of them were Asian leaders. So it was an Asian gathering of leaders and a summit. So that was a context, and if we were aware of this, it might be more understandable. Just as the recent 60th anniversary of the Bandung Conference in Jakarta and in Bandung, Indonesia, there was a gathering of African and Asian leaders. So they said something about the cooperation between Asia and Africa and things like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador John, you want to come?
Yeah, I'd say on one issue for security framework and structures here is that it's hard to order those properly while you still have an unnaturally divided Korean Peninsula. I think there's a recognition that the Korean Peninsula has to be reunified. How that happens, as yet unknown, but until it happens, it's very hard to structure a security cooperative mechanism when you don't know what the future security issue is going to hold. And I would certainly echo Ed's comments that there's a surfeit of international organizations or cooperative organizations here. It's a great jobs program for diplomats. Now that I'm no longer a diplomat, I could see that some need to be culled. But I mentioned APEC briefly. No one returned to that. EAS, no one returned to that issue. ASEAN had very little comment here from the panel. The ASEAN Regional Forum had very little comment from the panel. And I think, but I think we're all of the mind that a lot of this culling will occur naturally, as the years go by.
Or they will evolve into something more than the talking shops they've been so far.
Right.
So, Professor Kikuchi.
Yeah, on CICA, the membership is too diverse. So I don't see any possibility of this, CICA to evolve into a kind of strong, regional institution, excluding United States and other Western powers. And secondly, of course, President Xi Jinping advocates Asian security by Asians. But who are Asian? So, geographically, United States is not the part of Asia. But functionally, economically, politically, militarily, United States are essential part of Asia. In that context, the United States are Asian. So I don't see and also other Asian countries have no intention to exclude United States from Asian security architectures. Yeah. Thank you.
I've been told to draw this session to an end, but I'm conscious, A, that we haven't answered Scott Snyder's question, but he's left, so that's okay. But also that Charles, you haven't had a chance to, if you wanted to make some brief closing remarks yourself.
Well, I just say that, first of all, I agree with everyone who said that institution building is evolutionary. We talk about architecture, but in fact, we don't have architects. We have, an architect. We have lots of architects and jerry-built structures, and some things work and some things don't. And the creation of the AIIB was an example of how this evolutionary architecture evolves. And I think the APEC has had enormous impact. People forget the pre-APEC world. But, there's been a lot of learning by economies about actually global norms that they'd signed up to but didn't adhere to. China, I think, learned about the WTO initially through the APEC process. And it's a very efficient way for leaders to meet. George Herbert Walker Bush, his last trip was to 4 countries in Asia, traveled 25,000 miles, he got sick. But, his successors could meet all these Asian leaders in one place. Now there's too many of these meetings, I agree. But it's a very efficient way. And I think collective security is here to stay for quite a long time. We talked a little bit earlier about Joshua did about how institutions are losing legitimacy. But one set of institutions that is not losing legitimacy are U.S. alliances in Asia. In fact, they're gaining legitimacy, and that's because of all the uncertainty that we've been talking about. And so I think they are part of the architecture, and the trick is that they evolve in a way that is compatible with regional changes. And it's natural that China would feel threatened, perhaps, because historically some of these were constructed against China. But they're right now conservative institutions that are trying to maintain a stability. And one of the biggest difficulties is when somebody says, look at what's happening in Japan, and I look at what's happening in Japan and I see the economy's been in doldrums for 25 years. The population is decreasing. There will be more people over 100 than there are young men who are of military age, and it's constrained by U.S. alliances. And so why is anyone really that concerned about a Japan that has a different, somewhat different posture toward its region, and I think a more responsible posture?
Thank you very much, Charles, and I think it's now lunchtime. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you.